When rescuers entered the dilapidated cabin, they were met with a scene that left them breathless. A scarred, starving dog crouched protectively over an infant. Blood matted her fur, her eyes burned with determination, and every labored breath spoke of exhaustion. The baby was alive but frail, wrapped in a blanket so thin it barely shielded it from the cold. What had brought them here, and how had this unlikely duo survived the wilderness together? This is not a story of chance, but one of courage, desperation, and the unbreakable bond between two abandoned souls. Ruby, once a fighter dog destined for a life of violence, defied her instincts to become an unlikely hero. Her journey with the baby is one of survival against impossible odds, filled with heart-pounding moments, selfless acts, and a final twist that will leave you questioning the limits of loyalty and love. Let's unravel how this incredible saga began, deep in the heart of the wilderness, with a faint cry and a dog who chose hope over hunger. Ruby wasn't always a hero. In another life, she was a dog bred and trained for brutal underground fights. Her days were filled with pain, her nights haunted by the echoes of growls and snarls from battles she was forced to endure. Scars lined her body, each one a testament to the violence she had survived. But one fateful night, after a particularly vicious match, her handler grew careless. Ruby seized the opportunity, slipping through the cracks of her confinement and into the vast unknown. For weeks she wandered, her once muscular body growing thin and fragile. The streets were unkind, and humans were no longer a source of comfort, only fear. Her instincts kept her alive, but just barely. Each night, she curled up in the shadows, her stomach gnawing with hunger, her heart yearning for something she couldn't name. She had escaped the chains of her past, but she carried its weight in every step. Then, on a quiet morning, Ruby's life changed forever. As she scoured the edge of a forest for food, a sound pierced through the stillness, a soft, faint cry. At first, she froze, her ears twitching, unsure if the noise was real or a cruel trick of her mind. But as the cry grew louder, something stirred within her, curiosity mixed with a strange, unexplainable pull. She followed the sound, her paws crunching softly against the fallen leaves, until she found the source. There, nestled among the underbrush, was a baby. The infant was swaddled in a threadbare blanket, its tiny face flushed from the cold. Ruby's first instinct was to turn away. She was hungry, weak, and the baby was nothing like the scraps she usually sought. But as she locked eyes with the helpless child, a wave of unfamiliar emotions washed over her. Protectiveness, resolve, purpose. Before I continue with this extraordinary tale, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that special connection with an animal that goes beyond words, hit that like button, because Ruby's journey might just make you believe in miracles. Ruby knew she couldn't leave. With surprising gentleness, she nuzzled the blanket, her warm breath rousing the baby from its restless sleep. The infant let out a feeble cry, and Ruby's resolve hardened. She carefully grasped the corner of the blanket in her teeth, lifting the baby with a tenderness that belied her scarred exterior. She had no plan, no destination, only the instinct to move, to protect, to ensure this fragile life didn't fade away. As Ruby ventured deeper into the wilderness, the weight of her new responsibility settled over her. She pushed past hunger, past exhaustion, her every step driven by the faint heartbeat she now carried. The bond between them had formed in an instant, unspoken but undeniable. Little did Ruby know, this moment marked the beginning of a journey that would capture the hearts of millions and prove that even the most broken souls can rise to greatness when love is on the line. The sun dipped below the horizon and the temperature plummeted. Ruby found herself in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, their silhouettes casting long shadows under the pale light of a rising moon. She carefully lowered the baby onto a patch of soft moss, circling it as though to ward off the creeping chill. The infant stirred, its faint cries now replaced with shallow breaths. Ruby's instincts screamed for rest, but her sense of duty anchored her in place. She curled her body protectively around the baby, her fur providing the only warmth in the bitter night. The stars above glimmered faintly, offering no solace from the cold. Each sound, an owl's hoot, the rustle of leaves, put her on edge. Her ears twitched at every noise, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Ruby had fought many battles in her life, but none had ever felt as important as this. The night dragged on, and Ruby's exhaustion began to weigh heavily. Her stomach growled loudly, but she ignored it, her focus entirely on the tiny life in her care. She nudged the baby gently with her nose, ensuring it was still warm and safe. In that moment, something shifted inside her. Ruby wasn't just surviving anymore, she was protecting. For the first time, she felt a sense of purpose beyond her own survival. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the trees, Ruby's vigilance began to waver. The baby's breathing had steadied, and its warmth against her fur was a comfort she didn't expect. The forest began to stir with life, but Ruby remained motionless, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace they had found. She knew the journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but for now she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. Against all odds, they had made it through the night. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Ruby rose to her feet, her muscles stiff from the cold and her body weakened by hunger. The baby stirred, in its blanket, letting out a faint cry that echoed through the quiet forest. Ruby's ears twitched, and she nudged the infant softly, reassuring herself that it was still alive. The warmth of the sun was a welcome relief, but Ruby knew they couldn't stay in the clearing. Danger lurked everywhere, and their survival depended on finding shelter. The forest seemed endless as Ruby padded forward, the baby cradled carefully in the blanket she held in her teeth. The morning air was crisp, and the faint rustling of leaves hinted at life all around them. Ruby's sharp instincts kept her alert, her eyes scanning for threats while her heart raced with determination. Each step was a battle against her growing exhaustion, but the baby's presence spurred her forward. She couldn't fail, not now, not when this fragile life depended on her. After hours of wandering, Ruby caught a scent that made her pause. Water. Her parched throat burned with thirst, but she stayed focused. The baby's needs came first. Following the scent, Ruby soon came upon a small stream trickling through a cluster of rocks. She set the baby down gently on a soft patch of grass and approached the water cautiously, her eyes darting around for any sign of danger. The cold liquid soothed her dry throat, and she turned her attention back to the infant. Ruby dipped her nose into the water and then nudged the baby's lips, moistening them to provide some relief. The baby stirred, its tiny fingers twitching as it let out a weak cry. Ruby's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and determination. She knew they couldn't linger here for long. The stream was exposed and the scent of fresh water could attract predators. Gathering her strength, Ruby picked up the baby once more and continued her search for a safer place. As the sun climbed higher, Ruby's journey led her to a dense thicket that offered some protection from the elements. She pushed through the underbrush, her body scraping against the branches, until she found a small hollow beneath an old tree. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shield them from the wind. Ruby carefully laid the baby down, curling her body around it once again. For the first time since their journey began, she allowed herself a moment to rest. She knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but for now, they were safe. Ruby's brief respite was cut short as the stillness of the forest was shattered by a distant, guttural howl. Her ears perked up instantly, her body stiffening as her instincts took over. The sound was unmistakable. Predators were near. She shifted her position, ensuring the baby was securely tucked beneath her, as her sharp eyes scanned the surrounding trees for movement. Every muscle in her body tensed, prepared for the fight she knew might come. The forest grew unnervingly quiet, the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of birds, replaced by an oppressive silence. Ruby's heart raced, but her resolve never wavered. The baby's soft breathing against her fur reminded her of the stakes. She could sense their approach before she saw them. 3 coyotes, their lean forms weaving through the underbrush, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. They hesitated at the edge of the thicket, their noses twitching as they caught Ruby's scent. A low growl rumbled in Ruby's throat, a sound that was both a warning and a promise. She positioned herself protectively over the baby, her scarred body a shield. The coyotes circled cautiously, testing her resolve. One of them lunged, snapping at Ruby's flank, but she was quicker, her powerful jaws snapping back with a ferocity that sent it retreating with a yelp. The other 2 advanced simultaneously, their teeth bared. Ruby fought with a strength she didn't know she still had, her movements fueled by the primal need to protect. She lunged at one, her teeth sinking into its shoulder while using her body to block the baby from harm. The coyotes' growls echoed through the trees, but Ruby's defiance only grew. She knew she couldn't outlast them forever, but she refused to let them reach the child. Just as the fight reached its peak, a sudden sound cut through the chaos, a sharp human whistle followed by the crunching of footsteps. The coyotes froze, their heads snapping toward the noise. Ruby, too, paused, her chest heaving as she bared her teeth. The predators exchanged glances before retreating into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly as they had come. Ruby didn't relax until the footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a voice, calm but firm. "Whoa, easy there, girl," the voice said. A figure emerged from the trees, a middle-aged woman with weathered features and a hiking pack slung over her shoulder. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight before her, a battered dog standing guard over a baby, her body trembling with exhaustion but still brimming with determination. The woman, Grace, crouched low, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "You're protecting them, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice soft and filled with awe. Ruby didn't growl, but she remained on edge, her eyes locked on the stranger. Grace reached into her pack, pulling out a water bottle and a small packet of jerky. She placed them on the ground and backed away slowly, giving Ruby space to decide. Ruby sniffed the offerings cautiously before taking a hesitant sip of water. The baby stirred beneath her, letting out a faint cry. Grace's expression softened, and she took another step forward. "Let me help," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Ruby glanced between the baby and the woman, her instincts warring with her exhaustion. Finally, she stepped aside, her trust hard-earned but freely given. Grace approached carefully, wrapping the baby in a thicker blanket from her pack. She checked its pulse, her background as a nurse evident in her swift yet gentle movements. "You've done so well," she said, her eyes meeting Ruby's. "But you're hurt too. Let's get you both to safety." Ruby followed Grace as she carried the baby toward a nearby trailhead, her body limping but her spirit unbroken. The encounter with the coyotes had tested her resolve, but Ruby knew one thing for certain: she had found an ally, and together they would ensure the baby's survival. Ruby's brief rest was interrupted by the faint crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Her ears pricked, and her body tensed as she positioned herself protectively over the baby. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a voice, low and soothing. "It's okay, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." A man emerged from the trees, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He was middle-aged, his clothes dusted with dirt, and his expression one of cautious curiosity. Ruby growled low in her throat, her amber eyes locked on the stranger. The man stopped several feet away, kneeling slowly to appear less threatening. "Hey there," he said gently. "I see you're protecting something important." His gaze shifted to the bundle at Ruby's feet. "A baby?" He reached into his pack and pulled out a water bottle and a small piece of bread, placing them on the ground and stepping back. "It's for you," he assured her. Ruby sniffed the air cautiously, her growl softening as the man maintained his distance. The baby stirred, letting out a faint cry, and Ruby nuzzled it reassuringly before inching closer to the offerings. Hunger gnawed at her, but she wouldn't eat until she was sure the stranger meant no harm. The man watched quietly, his heart breaking at the sight of the scarred dog and the fragile infant. "You're amazing," he murmured. "You've kept this baby alive out here. Let me help you both." Ruby's instincts warred within her, protect or trust. After a moment she stepped back, allowing him closer to the child. The man inspected the baby with careful hands, his background as an EMT evident in his efficient movements. "The baby's dehydrated but still strong," he said softly, his eyes meeting Ruby's. "You've done an incredible job, but you can't do this alone. Let's get you both somewhere safe." Ruby hesitated, her eyes never leaving the man as he cradled the baby. But as he turned and gestured for her to follow, something deep within her, an instinct stronger than fear, urged her to take a step forward. Together, they began the next chapter of their journey, one filled with cautious hope and the promise of safety. The man led the way, his steps careful but steady, as Ruby followed closely, her eyes darting between him and their surroundings. The baby's soft breaths reassured her, but every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves kept her nerves taut. The trail they walked was uneven, winding through dense trees and rocky patches. Each step felt like a gamble, but Ruby's resolve never wavered. The man spoke softly, his voice calm as he narrated their path. "We're not far from a ranger station," he said, glancing back at Ruby. "They'll know what to do. You've done so much already, just a little further." Ruby didn't understand his words, but his tone was soothing, devoid of threat. Her instincts told her to remain cautious, yet something about his presence gave her hope, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time. The baby let out a soft cry, breaking the silence. The man paused, crouching to adjust the blanket around the infant. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, his hands gentle. Ruby stepped closer, her nose brushing against the baby as if to reassure herself. The man looked up, his gaze meeting Ruby's. "You're a good girl," he said softly. "I don't know how you did it, but you saved them." They continued forward, the forest gradually giving way to clearer paths. The man's pace quickened as a small clearing came into view, and beyond it, a ranger station stood like a beacon of hope. A faint trail of smoke curled from its chimney, and the distant sound of voices carried through the air. Ruby hesitated as they approached the station, her body tense. She didn't trust unfamiliar places, and the scent of other humans made her wary. The man noticed her hesitation and knelt down. "It's safe here," he said gently, holding out his hand. "You've done your part. Let me help you now." For a moment, Ruby stayed rooted, her instincts urging her to retreat, but the baby's faint whimper broke through her doubt. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, following the man into the clearing. The rangers emerged from the station, their faces etched with shock and concern as they took in the sight of the scarred dog and the tiny infant. "What happened here?" one of them asked, rushing forward to take the baby. "It's a miracle, that's what," the man replied, handing the infant over. "This dog. She saved the baby, protected them both out there." The rangers quickly set to work, their practiced hands tending to the baby, while another offered Ruby a bowl of water and scraps of food. She hesitated at first, her eyes scanning the group warily, but the scent of the food was too enticing to resist. Slowly she lowered her head, drinking deeply before nibbling on the offered scraps. As the baby was bundled into fresh blankets and prepared for transport to a nearby hospital, one of the rangers knelt beside Ruby, gently stroking her fur. "You're a hero, girl," they said softly. "You've done more than anyone could have asked." For the first time, Ruby allowed herself to relax, her body sinking to the ground as exhaustion overtook her. She watched as the baby was carried to safety, her heart beating steadily with a newfound sense of peace. Her journey wasn't over, but for the first time in her life, Ruby felt she wasn't alone. The man, whose name Ruby would later learn was Peter, led them through the winding forest path until they reached a small village nestled in the valley. The sight of smoke curling from chimneys and the faint murmur of human activity put Ruby on edge, but Peter's calm demeanor urged her to keep moving. The baby whimpered softly in his arms, and Ruby quickened her pace, staying close to them. As they entered the village, curious eyes followed their every move. Peter called out to a woman standing on a porch, her face weathered with age, but kind in its expression. "Margaret, I need your help. It's urgent." Margaret hurried over, her sharp eyes taking in the bundle in Peter's arms and the scarred dog at his side. "Goodness, Peter, what happened?" she asked, reaching for the baby with practiced care. Ruby tensed, but Peter placed a reassuring hand on her head. "It's okay, Ruby. She's here to help." Margaret inspected the baby quickly, her lips pressing into a firm line. "Dehydrated and malnourished, but alive. We'll need to act fast." She turned to Peter. "Bring them to my home. I have supplies." Peter nodded and led the way, Ruby following closely. Inside Margaret's warm, rustic kitchen, the baby was carefully cleaned, fed, and wrapped in fresh blankets. Ruby sat near the door, her eyes never leaving the infant. Margaret glanced at her and smiled. "She's protective. You can tell she loves that baby." "She's the reason the baby's alive," Peter replied. "She found the child in the woods and kept it safe. I've never seen anything like it." Word of the miraculous rescue spread quickly through the village. Neighbors stopped by, bringing food, blankets, and supplies. One of them, a young veterinarian named Claire, approached Ruby cautiously. "You've been through so much, haven't you, girl?" she said softly, holding out a bowl of fresh meat. Ruby hesitated but eventually stepped forward, her hunger overcoming her wariness. Claire's gentle touch and soothing voice began to ease Ruby's fears. Over the next few days, the baby's health steadily improved under Margaret's care. Ruby, though still cautious, began to relax in the presence of the villagers. Children would peek around corners to catch a glimpse of the heroic dog, their whispers filled with awe. Ruby's scars and wary eyes told a story of hardship, but her actions spoke of unwavering loyalty and love. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Peter sat beside Ruby on the porch of Margaret's home. The baby lay asleep inside, its soft breaths audible through the open window. Peter reached out, scratching Ruby gently behind the ears. "You've done something incredible, Ruby. You gave that child a chance at life." Ruby leaned into his touch, her body finally beginning to let go of the tension it had carried for so long. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never known: belonging. As the days turned into weeks, Ruby's transformation became evident to everyone who had witnessed her arrival. Once a skittish and scarred stray, she now moved with a quiet confidence, her once weary eyes shining with trust. The baby, now thriving under the village's care, had become a symbol of resilience, and Ruby its steadfast guardian. Margaret, ever the matriarch of the village, approached Peter one afternoon as he worked outside her home. "You know," she began, her hands clasped in front of her, "Ruby deserves more than just our gratitude. She's part of this family now." Peter looked at Ruby, who was resting near the baby's cradle, her ears perked at the sound of Margaret's voice. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted. "She's earned her place here." That evening, the villagers gathered in the small town square. Peter stood at the center with Ruby by his side, her scars a stark reminder of her past, but her calm demeanor a testament to her new life. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "Ruby isn't just a dog. She's a hero. She saved a life when no one else could. She's shown us what loyalty, courage, and love truly mean." He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her head. "From this day forward, Ruby is part of this village, part of this family." The crowd erupted in applause, and children ran forward to pet Ruby, their laughter filling the air. Ruby's tail wagged slowly, her heart finally at ease. For the first time, she wasn't surviving, she was living. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Ruby lay beside the baby's cradle, her head resting on her paws. The two had come so far together, their bond unbreakable. In that moment, Ruby knew she had found her purpose, not just in protecting the child, but in embracing the love that had always seemed out of reach. Ruby's journey from fighter to guardian had ended, but her legacy had just begun. And as the stars twinkled above, the village settled into the quiet of the night, with its newest hero keeping watch. Months passed, and Ruby's story became more than a tale whispered through the village. It spread far and wide, reaching the ears of journalists, animal advocates, and communities yearning for inspiration. The once forgotten dog was now a symbol of courage and resilience, her scars a badge of honor, her devotion a testament to the power of love. One crisp morning, Peter walked into Margaret's kitchen, a letter clutched in his hand. "It's from the city," he said, a mix of surprise and pride in his voice. "They want to honor Ruby and share her story." Margaret, busy tending to the baby, now robust and full of life, glanced up with a warm smile. "Well, it's about time. Ruby's touched more lives than we can count." The day of the ceremony arrived, and the entire village gathered in the square. Ruby sat at Peter's side, calm but alert, her eyes scanning the crowd as if ensuring all was well. The baby, nestled in Margaret's arms, cooed softly, her tiny hand reaching toward Ruby's fur. The sight was enough to bring tears to the eyes of many who had witnessed their journey. A representative from the city stood at the podium, recounting Ruby's story with reverence. "This dog," he began, his voice steady but emotional, "reminds us that even in the darkest of times, light can be found. Ruby didn't just save a life. She inspired a community and reminded us all of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals." As the crowd erupted in applause, Peter knelt beside Ruby, fastening a medal of recognition around her neck. Ruby tilted her head, as if sensing the significance of the moment. She let out a soft huff, her tail wagging gently, a rare show of pride from the humble hero. In the days that followed, Ruby's life returned to its new rhythm. She spent her mornings playing with the baby, now toddling on unsteady legs, her afternoons roaming the village with Peter, and her evenings curled up beside the cradle. She had become more than a protector. She was a cornerstone of the family, a symbol of hope for the village. One evening, as the sun cast a golden glow over the fields, Margaret sat beside Peter on the porch. The baby toddled toward Ruby, who lay contentedly in the grass. "You know," Margaret said, her voice soft, "Ruby's story is just beginning. She's part of something much bigger now." Peter nodded, watching as the baby clutched Ruby's fur, giggling with delight. "She's a reminder that love and loyalty can change the world, one small act at a time." As the stars began to twinkle above, Ruby lifted her head, her gaze steady and serene. She wasn't just a dog who had survived against all odds. She was a guardian, a healer, and a hero whose legacy would endure long after the night settled over the village. And as she lay her head back down, surrounded by love and laughter, Ruby knew she was finally home.